Can I, can I say, first of all, what a huge pleasure it is to be here at the Open University today to congratulate the latest honorary doctor of the Open University, Kwame himself, who was awarded an honorary doctorate from the Open University for his great services. And to be here as someone who started off my career as a part-time tutor for the Open University before my descent into politics. And to say what the Open University has achieved over 40 years, 1.5 million graduates, the greatest force for educational opportunity for adults that we've ever seen in this country. I congratulate the Open University on everything it has achieved. And can I also say I'm very pleased to be here with Phyllis Starkey and Andrew Pakes, our candidates in Milton Keynes. And I want to talk today about some of the big changes that are taking place around the world, what I think we can contribute to it. But the first thing I want to do is to thank all of you. Many of you have come representing some of the great organizations, the great NGOs, the great charitable groups in our country. And it's because of what you did, because of the campaigns you've run, because of the success of your campaign, particularly around the Millennium Development Goals, and because of the energy that the churches and faith groups and NGOs have brought to bear in the development movement, that we have managed to see debt cancellation for 20 countries. We have managed to see international development aid trebled over the last few years. We have managed to see in this year alone the banning of cluster munitions. We have managed to see educational investment making it possible for 40 million children around the world in the last few years to get education, and make it possible for us to make available free health care to many, many mothers and children in so many different parts of the world. So I want to thank all the organizations, churches, faith groups, voluntary organizations and NGOs for everything that you have done to make these things possible. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about international events in a few minutes. But you know, my first experience of foreign affairs when I became a member of Parliament was one that almost made me retire immediately. I was working alongside Gerald Kaufman, who was our Shadow Foreign Secretary at the time, and I was sharing an office with Tony Blair in the House of Commons, and this is 1983. And Gerald Kaufman spoke on all the foreign affairs issues, but he also liked to go to the opera and go to see new films in the evenings. So whenever interviews came up in the evenings, he would either pass them to me or pass them to Tony Blair to do with foreign radio and television stations. And one evening he asked me whether I would stand by to do an interview while he went to the opera. And he said it was an interview with a radio station down under, and would I just be at my telephone at 10 o'clock and I would get this call and it would be morning down under. And I waited at my phone. I got the short straw on this one. Tony was lucky. I waited at my phone, and at 10 o'clock the phone rang, and they said, we're putting you straight through to the radio station. And then the radio interviewer immediately came on and said, Mr. Brown, he said, you represent the new Labour Party, but things are pretty stuck in our country. And I said, no, no, no. I said, and I was a bit name-dropping. I said, I just met Bob Hawke, the Australian Prime Minister, the other day, and he was telling me how great reforms were happening in Australia under his Australian Labour Party. And the interviewer said, Mr. Brown, he said, this is Radio Auckland. You're speaking to the people of New Zealand. And our Prime Minister is not Bob Hawke, it's David Lange. I've never been invited back by that radio station. And I've never had the nerve to visit New Zealand ever since. I'm not in as bad a position as Richard Nixon was. Some of you may have heard the story that 50 years ago, Richard Nixon was Vice President of the United States of America. And he was invited to the celebration of the Ghanaian independence. President Nkrumah and all the leaders invited him out, and he represented the United States. And Nixon was a rather gauche man, as you probably know, didn't quite know what to do in formal settings. And he was trying to sort of get into the crowd to talk to people. And so he went down into the crowd and started shaking people's hands. He said, how does it feel to be free? And then he said, the next one he said, how does it feel to be free? And he came to the next person, how does it feel to be free? And they said, how should I know? I come from Alabama. Now, the lesson of this, and this is what I want to talk about, America did achieve civil rights in the 1960s, but Africa has still to achieve the economic, social, and social rights that you and many others have been campaigning for many years. And I want to talk today about how I see what I would call the global society emerging, how I see the evolution of what I call our moral sense, and how people are increasingly accepting that we have responsibilities not simply to each other as physical neighbors, but increasingly accepting that we have responsibilities to people in every part of the world, no matter their background, no matter their religion, no matter their race, no matter where they come from. And I think this evolution of our moral sense, if I can put it like that, towards the creation of a global society is the most important force that is going to make for change in the years to come. Now, first, maybe I should just say something about domestic politics and about this week and about the exciting debates. Today, I haven't got here any of the opposition leaders to contest me. But if I say anything wrong, Douglas Alexander, the Development Secretary, is here to correct me. Glenys Kinnock, our European Minister, is here to correct me. And I believe we will have David Miliband and Bob Ainsworth here in a minute. So when we have our discussion, I have got people to challenge me and correct me if I say something wrong. You know, out of the publicity and the hype around the debates over these last few days, I think the big choices of the election have now been established. I've certainly been energized by the debate that is taking place in the country. I think the election is wide open, and it's a huge debate that has now got to take place. But I thought that what came out of these debates is a clear idea of what the choices that we now face are. And these are big choices. The choice as to whether we sustain the recovery and make sure that we secure the jobs of British people. The choice as to whether we can make sure that as we cut the deficit, we can protect our public services, our hospitals, our schools, and our policing, or whether we return to the days when our police, our hospitals and schools were both underfunded and were left without the proper support they need. The choice about who's going to build the new jobs, the new industries of the future, and whether that's simply going to be left to market forces or not. And I believe that your jobs, your NHS, your schools, your policing, these are what are on the ballot paper when it comes to the election a few weeks from now. And if I may say so, I think the Conservatives have made some strategic mistakes in the way they've approached this election. First of all, they haven't recognised how important it is to secure a recovery from recession, and how important it is that we make sure that that recovery becomes sustained growth. And if you take $6 billion out of the economy immediately, then you put jobs at risk, businesses at risk, put growth at risk. And every other European country, America and all the major countries of the world have decided that they will not withdraw support from the economy until the recovery is fully established. And I am not going to put jobs or businesses or growth at risk by withdrawing the support too quickly. And I believe that Conservative policy is exposed as putting the recovery at risk. I think the second thing the Conservatives have not realised is the importance that we attach to our public services in this country. I thought they'd learned a lesson after 2001 and 2005 that public services are a priority, and particularly our commitment to the NHS, to police, and of course to our schools and education. But in the last few months, by opting for their tax cuts as opposed to investing in public services, they've retreated into becoming the old Conservative Party, where schools would have to lose teachers and teaching assistants, where hospitals will not give the guarantees that we are giving for patient care, cancer care, for seeing a doctor in the evenings or weekends, at the same time getting your operation within 18 weeks. And of course, they're not even giving a guarantee that they will match our funding on policing. And I don't want to go back to a pre-1997 situation where the numbers of police were falling as the amount of crime was rising. Today, the numbers of police are at a record level and crime is falling. And I think the third mistake they've made is to assume that they are the automatic inheritors of change. And when I look at the Conservative Manifesto, it's very similar to the Conservative Manifesto of 2001 and 2005. They're still supporting hereditary peers. They're still supporting major cuts in inheritance tax for the richest people in this country. The 3,000 richest estates getting £200,000 each. They're not supporting the new politics that we are supporting of reforming the House of Commons and the House of Lords. They would cut child tax credits for middle-class families and cut child trust funds. And it seems to me, instead of sending a message about change, it looks very much like the same old Conservative Party with new public relations, but the similar policies of the past. And I believe that we will show about future jobs, about how we will invest in digital, how we will make sure that we have a future in low-carbon industries, how we can show that we are going to be in advanced manufacturing, how we can succeed in the creative industries, how we can make education one of our greatest exports as well as one of our greatest services to people in this country, that it is us, the Labour Party, that have the ideas and the credible plans and a determination to take Britain into the future. And when people will ask, who will equip our country best for the future? Who's best for the NHS? Who's best for jobs? Who's best for policing? Who is best for our schools? Who's best for the prospects for our young children? I hope that when it comes to the final decision, that people will see that it is the Labour Party that offers the best policies for the future. Now, I want to talk about how we move to the global society that I've been suggesting I want to discuss earlier on. And let's just have a look at where we started after 1945 and where we were. World War II was indeed a huge turning point, and I think you're going to see just a picture that reminds us of the battles between states that were disfiguring all the first half of the 20th century. And these were fights between states based on the Treaty of Versailles idea that self-determination was the overriding principle, and what happened behind the borders of a state, behind its boundaries, was really a matter for that country rather than a matter for the whole world. But after 1945, the world started to change, and I think our sense of what our responsibilities are as global citizens started to change as well. The big force that made for people to change international law was, of course, the Holocaust. Out of people's experience of the Holocaust was, first of all, the European Convention of Human Rights and the International Declaration of Human Rights. And that meant that people understood that what happened behind the borders of different states, what was happening to individual citizens, how rights were being violated, torture, murder, extermination, the Holocaust, that it was a matter of concern for every citizen of the world. And our international law after the Second World War was built around the idea that we had to take seriously acts of torture and acts of tyranny. And that was the starting point for what I regard as the expansion of our moral sense of what our responsibilities were to each other. But as we moved forward, in the 50s and 60s, colonialism was replaced by independence for states. And then when we came to the 70s, the big issue that galvanized people, maybe some of you here, but certainly me, was anti-apartheid. When people started to understand that you couldn't discriminate on the grounds of race, and if something was happening within a country where that prejudice and discrimination was being imposed on people, then the world itself, and not just that country, had a duty to act. And some of you may remember that picture, Steve Biko's funeral, Cry Freedom, Richard Attenborough's film built around it. And people began campaigning in every part of the world to end apartheid, doing whatever they could to support Nelson Mandela in prison, whether it was sending Christmas cards to him, as many of us did, or whether it was many other demonstrations that took place. When I first met Nelson Mandela after he came out of prison, and I was able to meet him a year or two later when he came to Britain, I greeted him and went up to him, and he said, a representative of the British Empire. And of course, what the South Africans were surprised about was how in Britain there was so much determination on the part of the British people to support the campaign against apartheid. Not everyone, as we know, but large numbers of people supporting that campaign. So our moral sense expanded as people recognized that you could not live in a world or tolerate a world where racism was practiced in that way. But then the next event that I think also determined how we see the world now comes next. And it's a scene from Ethiopia. And I think this is the 1980s as we move on from the 1970s. Some of you may remember this.
Outside Coram, it lights up a biblical famine, now in the 20th century. This place, say workers here, is the closest thing to hell on earth. Thousands of wasted people are coming here for help. Many find only death. They flood in every day from villages hundreds of miles away, dulled by hunger, driven beyond the point of desperation. 15,000 children here now, suffering, confused, lost. Death is all around. A child or an adult dies every 20 minutes. Coram, an insignificant town, has become a place of grief.
That's hell on earth in Ethiopia in the 1980s, and it moved the whole world. And it gave birth to Live Aid. It gave birth to huge movements to raise money to help people in Ethiopia and then in other countries at later dates. And all of us who were around at that time will remember that the nation in Britain, but nations around the world, were awakened by the injustice they saw and the need to take action. And so our moral sense was expanding as people came to realize that we had a duty not only to act where there was tyranny and where there was torture and oppression and where there was racial discrimination abuse, but where there was poverty itself, where there was malnutrition, where there was hunger, where there was deprivation, where people could not live. And I think the effect of that on our generation of what happened in Live Aid is something that we all remember. But it's not Ethiopia today. The Open University helping with a program to help midwives and others train so that they can help their pregnant mothers. But the truth is that there are still 1 in 8 mothers in Ethiopia dying in childbirth, something that is completely intolerable in a world where the figure is something like 1 in 4,000 in Britain. It's 1 in 8 in Ethiopia. So we have a long way to go. And then let's move on to the 90s and what didn't happen as well as what happened. This is Rwanda. I told the story the other day of the Rwanda Children's Museum. And if you go into the Rwanda Children's Museum, you see a picture of a young boy called David. And he was one of the victims of the genocide in Rwanda. And on that picture of him and the memorial to him, it says, David, age 12, favorite sport, football, favorite pastime, making people laugh, ambition to be a doctor, method of death, torture, last words, the United Nations are coming. These were the last words he said to his mother, and the United Nations didn't come. And here we have even a church in Rwanda, the scene of mass brutalities, when the world stood by and did nothing. So it must evoke our conscience now that while we had come to recognize that certain things demanded intervention on our part and we had a responsibility to protect, we were still not doing enough and certainly did not do enough in Rwanda. And it wasn't just Rwanda, it was also the Balkans. We found that in the 1990s there were even still concentration camps in Europe itself. And that is a scene from the Balkans in the 1990s. And then just look forward to the Congo, which has been the scene of more deaths than in any conflict since the Second World War, and is virtually unreported in our country. A population the size of our country, 2 million deaths at least since in the last few years, the biggest number of deaths since the Second World War. And you have a child soldier in the Congo, and we have so far failed to be able to take the action. While we have United Nations forces and contribute a huge amount, we have so far failed as a world to do enough to stop this conflict. In the Congo, there is an orphanage When I went to Africa a few years ago, I met a lot of AIDS orphans. And AIDS orphans in Africa, 17 million of them still. AIDS orphans not receiving help even from an extended family, but completely on their own and having to be taken in by charities and passed day to day, week to week from extended families or people who will help them foster families to another. And I met, when I was in Tanzania, a very young girl called Miriam, and she was 12 years old. And her father and mother had both died from AIDS. And she herself had contracted HIV. She had tuberculosis. And I was talking through an interpreter to this young girl. And then I realized something that I hadn't quite understood as I talked to her first, that if you looked into her eyes, this 12-year-old, the years when people should be optimistic about the future, thinking about life ahead, planning for the future, there was simply no hope in her eyes at all. All hope for the future had been actually destroyed. And in the Congo, you know, in the orphanages in the Congo, it's a sad reflection of these times that they separate orphans from AIDS orphans. And the reason that they do it is because AIDS orphans have no hope in their eyes. And they worry that that would influence the other children. So here we are dealing with a world, 75 million children not at school, dealing with a world where maternal mortality affects 500,000 mothers every year, where they unnecessarily and avoidably die, living in a world where we could deliver healthcare to large numbers of people but are failing to do so, and living in a world where, as you know, 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. So what have we got to do in the next few years to sort this out? I talked about the advances at the beginning, debt relief, overseas development aid. I talked about the advances we made in cluster munitions. I talked about the advances we made in providing education and health to large numbers of people who otherwise, without the efforts of the United Kingdom International Development Department, I'm pleased that Douglas Alexander is here with us today, without their efforts and the great missionary work that they do in Africa and elsewhere, we could not have achieved anything. But what is the agenda for the future? I would suggest 4 things that we've got to do before we have our question time. First is, we need an international and global view of what reconstruction, security, peacemaking and humanitarian aid is going to involve in the future. Congo, civil war, lots of countries around the world where we've got huge problems. Why can't we have an international organization that is a global organization staffed by people from all the different countries of the world that is responsible not just for humanitarian aid and that it's there when we need it, responsible not just for peacekeeping, and there are 100,000 peacekeepers at the moment, but responsible for reconstruction and development and security in those countries where there is a threat of civil war, a breakdown of civil society, or problems that are not going to be able to be dealt with by that country alone, and where they need the help of the international community. And we don't yet, despite the development of UN organizations, have an organization like that. I call it the Institutions for a Just Peace. And if you're going to have just peace around the world, and you're going to have people who feel that they are secure, then you've got to build the global institutions that are necessary for that. I think the second thing that we need, if we're going to have a global society, is we build the global environmental organizations that are necessary to deal with the problem of climate change. You know, it is remarkable, despite the failures at Copenhagen, that more than 100 countries have now signed up to their international emission targets for the future. So more than 100 countries have agreed that they will meet an international plan by submitting their own targets for them to be implemented over the next few years. So we have made some progress. But what we need to make it happen, and for the investment in low-carbon industry to take place, and for the money to be spent by the developed countries helping the developing countries, and to stop the problem of climate change refugees and climate change evacuees, which is going to happen in different countries, is a global umbrella for environmental action. And we don't have that at the moment in the way that we need it. And the third thing we need is we need a global financial system that works for people. How many are shocked to have heard that in Goldman Sachs, they were making money out of speculating against subprime mortgages? How many are shocked what we have heard about the operation of financial institutions in different parts of the world, where they've acted with both recklessness and irresponsibility. So we have got to build not a national or simply regional financial order for the future that guarantees that people will have the chance of a fair deal from the global financial system. But for this, the first great global industry, the financial sector, we need global rules, global supervision, and we need fairness. And so we are proposing, again in the next few weeks, at the IMF and at the international organizations like the G20, as we did last year when we hosted the G20 in London, that you build a new financial order, proper supervision at a global level, proper monitoring of global financial institutions and international and multinational companies at a global level, proper supervision allied to proper rules for the conduct of financial operations so that finance serves the people and not the other way round. And that's why we're saying that these institutions have got to be properly capitalized so that they protect people against the risk. And that's why we're also saying that in addition to liquidity ratios and everything being sorted out in the financial system, there's got to be some responsibility of the global financial institutions to the people of the world. And that's why we need a global levy that recognizes that the banks owe a great deal to society as well as the other way around. And our proposal for a global financial levy is, I believe, now being accepted by large numbers of countries who were previously against it. And I believe that over the next few months we can build a platform where we can see that levy introduced and parallel track a levy in the United States of America with Europe could mean that for the first time we've got some means by which we can hold global financial institutions responsible, and they can't just choose between different countries and engage in a race to the bottom between different countries in the world. And the fourth thing we need to do is, of course, to make sure that our policies for international development and for the economic and social development of the countries we want to partner with are the best policies for the future. We have the World Cup this year. One goal is a campaign to get these 75 million children who are not in school into school. So in the next few weeks, you will see a great deal of publicity about the One Goal campaign and how it's important that we persuade other countries to join us, as we are doing, in providing funds for the education of large numbers of children. Maternal mortality, our campaign is moving forward because it is the theme of the G20 and G8 in Canada in the next few months. And I hope that we will have commitments made by different countries that they will join us in giving the basic support that is necessary for proper midwife services to be available to mothers in every part of the world. You know, when Sarah started this campaign on maternal mortality with so many other people in the White Ribbon Alliance who are doing so much good work, she told me the story of how so many mothers in Africa, they say goodbye to their friends before the date at which their child is due, because so many people do not survive childbirth and thousands of people die unnecessarily, and 1 in 20 births in Africa leads to the mother dying with orphan children. So we have got to continue that campaign where for a little amount of money we can make sure that the technology that is fairly straightforward is available to all countries in Africa. And our health aims must be to take action against malaria and tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS. And we will insist not on vouchers being provided for schools or healthcare. We will insist that we will support free healthcare. And one country after another in Africa, as a result of money we and other countries have made available, are now themselves able to offer free health. So what has been achieved in Britain in the 1940s is now going to be achieved in many African countries, that there is free healthcare, particularly for mothers and children. Now, what does the future hold? I've said we have to do these 4 things. Build the institutions of a just society. We have to make sure that there is a global environmental organization that can make sure that we can deal properly with climate change and build on Copenhagen. I've said that we must, at the same time, build financial institutions that serve the countries of the world and do not simply serve themselves. And I've said we've got to move further, not simply in development aid, but let me add, in the economic empowerment of people in Africa and in the developing countries. And what makes me optimistic about the future? That I think this idea of the moral sense, of people's responsibilities to each other, of people being good neighbors, of being our brothers and sisters keepers, that this idea that started off in the hunter-gatherer society as simply taking responsibility for yourself and your family, grew as the centuries passed into taking responsibility as part of a village and a town and a community and a nation, is now such a powerful idea around the world that with the modern means of communication that we have to connect with each other and talk to each other and communicate with each other, it can be the powerful driving force for building the proper institutions of a global society, a truly global society where people feel part of each other. And why am I so confident? Because all the major religions and all the major ideologies of the world that are mainstream and captivate people's imagination all have at their center this idea of the moral sense and people's responsibility to each other. Just look at what the main themes are, the golden rules of each religion in the world. Coming up soon. I am on the road, but I'm also here. I think we've lost it. Judaism, love your neighbor as yourself. Islam, no one is a believer unless he desires for another what he desires for himself. Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you find yourself hurtful. Go through each of the major religions of the world, and all of them have the same golden rule at the heart of them. Sikhism, treat others as you would be treated. Hinduism, do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. Christian, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Each major religion has as its center this idea of our responsibility to other people, and even people who are not believers. Just take example, Tom Paine, my country is the world, and my religion is to do good. So if you look at the great philosophers and the great religions of the world, there is this central idea that shines through as we enter the global age, that you can create a global society where people will accept responsibility for other people, that you move beyond simply accepting responsibility for your immediate physical neighbor, and you move through these last 50 years, not inevitable, not stages of history, not something that is going to happen anyway, but by our actions, we can actually create a global society with global institutions where people take responsibilities for other people and therefore do great things. And if people say that that is an impossible idea, and people say it cannot be done, if people say that you cannot expect in this world that you can achieve something as bold as that, then just look at what you have achieved and look what the world has achieved when we've taken action. Slavery was abolished when people thought it was impossible to do so. Men and women have the vote now when people said it was impossible to imagine working people having the vote. Women's emancipation, people said it was impossible and something that wouldn't happen, and has happened. Apartheid, as I've said, people taking action against debt relief, people taking action against poverty and injustice. What people say is impossible and beyond our reach can happen if we take action ourselves. There's a story told about John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, and he decided that he would show that America was in a position to use all new technologies and make the difference to the scientific and technological future of the world by announcing that he would go to the moon, send someone to the moon. And he announced it, and then he called in the people from NASA, the space agency, and they said, but Mr. President, he said, we can't do this. He said, we don't have the money, we don't have the technology, we haven't got the satellites, we haven't got the space people. We can't do it. And Kennedy said, you can now. And that's what changed. And he went down to NASA to meet the people at the Space Center and started talking to them. And he realized something had happened, because he said, what are you doing? The guy said, I'm a scientist. The other said, I'm a technician. Another guy said, I'm an engineer. Other people said, I'm working on the research side doing a postgraduate degree. And then he came to a woman who was a cleaner and said, what do you do? And she said, I'm helping put a man on the moon. And she was absolutely right. She was part of a team doing something very, very big indeed. We are all part of a team doing something very, very big indeed. We are in the first generation that has the chance to build a truly global society in this world, to build the global institutions that can make that society work, to deal with the evils of hunger and poverty and deprivation and illiteracy and disease, and it is within our hands to do it. Thucydides, the great historian, said, when will there be justice in Athens? writing about ancient Greece. And he said, the answer was, when the people who are not suffering are as outraged as the people who are suffering. And I think that's the lesson for us. If we are determined, if we are resolute in what we wish to do, if we have this vision of a global society, if we then have the idea about how we build institutions to deal with the problems that I've just been talking about, then we can indeed change the world. Each of you, all of us, together, changing the world. Thank you very much.